This is Greg Wagner. This is video 3 from the Introduction to Java program. Today we'll be going over loops. So the learning objectives for this class are understanding the basics of loops, and then we'll cover basically the basic 3 types of loops: a precondition loop, also called a while loop; a postcondition loop, also called a do loop; and the iterative or repeated loop called a for loop. So loops are basically kind of a fundamental operation along with decision flow statements or logical statements to doing what computers do best. Computers are excellent at doing simple, repeatable tasks. So loops allow you to repeat over and over things, maybe slight conditions in the data, and then perform actions on them. And then loops instruct the computer to repeat tasks on very varied data. So basically, what it's doing is you'll keep on running through the data, but you might change a few values. And this segues into our next unit, which is over arrays. So basically there are 3 types of loops. There's called the precondition loop, which runs until a condition is false. It's called the while loop. So basically you can't enter or continue the loop unless the conditions are beginning to be, to enter it, the conditions are true when you try to iterate through the loop. So for example, a while loop would be like, you can only enter, a place while you have like a certain number of tickets, and then once the tickets are gone, you can no longer enter. A postcondition loop is like a precondition loop, except you can run it once. So it might go through the loop once, and then it checks the condition to see if it should stay in there. Keep on going through the loop. You can think of this as like having a preview of what's going to happen, then you have to pay the next few times to go through. An iterative loop is basically you run a fixed number of times or go through a fixed number of iterations. It's very similar to the while loop, but generally you set how many times you're going to go through it or how to end it early on, so you know that it's going to be a fixed number of times. And so while loops generally run until the conditions changes. So basically you go into a while loop, and once, based on if the condition is true, and then you might make a few manipulations to the data, and you check to see if the data has changed. This is used a lot for optimization, where you keep on trying to optimize something until you think you can't get it any better. And these are very general purpose loops, and you can actually, the other 2 loops we're going to talk about later, you can build using while loops, but it's just not as convenient. So to give an example of repetition 1, which is also called a precondition loop, and so the precondition loop basically runs while the statement is true, hence the name while loop. So in Java, it's a while loop. So I'm going to make a condition, so I'll do while counter equals 0, and then I'm going to say while counter is less than 25. So while counter is less than 25, this loop will keep on going. And then basically what I want to do is system.out.println, and then I'll just say counter, and then I'm going to use the plus equals operation. And so what the plus equals operation is basically adds a value to the right to the value on the left. So I'll say counter plus equals 5. This is equivalent to counter equals counter plus 5. So just a shorthand on how to iterate different values. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to run this. So I'll do run. I'll right click on this, and then run. Oops, I'll do this up here. New launch configuration. Do a run. So you can actually see this. Run. This is going to be where's Java? Java application. And the main class is going to be in Java Basics dot repetitions. Let's call repetitions, right? Apply. Let's see if this runs. Change the run mode. And you see it prints out all the numbers. I'll put this down on the bottom. So this is a while loop. And so the do loop is very similar to the while loop. It runs, at least runs once, but then you check the conditions at the end of it. And so a lot of times the first loop iteration through the loop will be to run it to like initialize values or something like that. And then so do loops are used a lot by when like you're first going to programming, but they usually aren't that common in actual running code. A lot of times we'll use while or for loops to do what do loops are used for. And generally these are used for like menus or cases where there needs to be an initialization. So to be perfectly honest, the only time I really use a do loop is when I'm making a console-based menu, and I know it at least has to get run once. So the next kind of loop we talk about is called a post-condition loop. Post-condition loop is also called the do-while loop. And so for the post-condition loop, it's going to always run once. And so I'm going to reinitialize counter to 5, and then I'm going to do and down here while counter is less than, I'll do 30 this time, and then cut and paste the same thing. So I'll put a little thing here, system.out.println while loop, system.out.println do loop, and when I run this, you can see it. Oops, got the semicolon here. See, it does both of them. So it does both of them here. And then the final loop we're going to talk about today is the for loop, which runs a fixed number of times. It was generally used for you. It doesn't have to be a fixed number of times. You can have it, but you basically set the conditions. So you'll have a counter that it gets set, a condition that gets set, and then how you'd iterate on that particular counter, all set within the loop initialization, which can't happen in while and do loops. And so a lot of times when we talk about our next unit are arrays, but these for loops are usually used for kind of iterating through arrays or iterating through some sort of fixed size data structure. And then the last loop we talked about is called an iterative loop, also called a for loop. So for loop is you define everything within the statement. So I'm going to give a different name. I like using II. So II is less than, in this case we'll do it less than 20, and then II plus plus. So you notice here, how we do the whole loop within this one line. So it's very similar to these other ones, except you initialize the value, set the conditions, and then set the iterator within the loop. So generally while and do loops aren't really used for like counting out stuff. That's generally what for loops are for. While and do loops are mostly saying, okay, keep on doing something until the condition changes, like a menu item changes or some sort of value changes. But for example here, we'll just use them for counting. So print line, counting. And then I'll say up here, system.out.println for loop. And then when I run these, oops, I have this values counter. This should be II. You can see all the different loops in here. So I hope you enjoyed this video. The next video is going to go over arrays, which will go in a little bit more into showing how arrays are used with looping. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is down below. It's GM Wagner.